Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Marwan Abdurrabbo, third year student at Queen's University. Welcome back to my second episode of my program on this season of MuslimDo. I'm honored to be here today, and I'd like to thank the great team behind this app for their efforts and dedication. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them the best. Today I'll be talking about human nature. Human nature is fragile. Human nature is it's very weak. It's not my opinion, by the way. It's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in his holy book. وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفٌ. The human has been created weak. So we'll talk about a very striking example of that. And we're going to be talking about Ghazwat Ohod. It's one of the most well-known events in Islamic history. Quraysh, the pagans of Mecca, they want to pay back for what happened to them back in the Battle of Badr, when they were heavily defeated by the Muslims who were at that time based in Medina. They used an incredible amount of money and raised an army to invade Medina. That was the whole objective behind the Ghazwat Ohod. The Muslims in Medina at the time were, of course, led by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they were set on mounting a defense to this threat. So they decided to intercept the army outside the city. But the force ratios, just to visualize it, they were very desperate. So they were outnumbered about 3-1. So 3 soldiers for 1 soldier. Their whole army, the Muslim army, had just 2 horses. The Mushrikeen in total had about 200. So it was a huge disadvantage. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he needed to exploit the terrain to his benefit. So what he did was he situated his army outside of Medina. And the way he situated it was between the Ohod mountain range. There's this misconception that Ohod is just one mountain. No, it's actually somewhat of a mountain range. It's covers a bit of area. So he situated his army between the Ohod mountain range and a small hill called the Hill of Archers. And we'll see why I got that name in a second. But Ohod, basically, the Ohod mountain range, it covered the right flank and the rear of the Muslim army. If you want to visualize it, the Muslim army, there is Ohod to the right, and it sort of goes around arches to the rear. And then the Hill of Archers is on the left flank. Now the Prophet Muhammad, he sort of did this so that the only way for the Mushrikeen can attack the Muslim army was through a frontal assault. And this puts the attacking army at a huge disadvantage. There was one problem though. They were much more mobile and they could encircle and attack the Muslim rear. Now, how could they do that? Well, we said that they had much more cavalry than the Muslims had. The Muslims had pretty much no cavalry. The Mushrikeen had quite a bit of cavalry. And the thing is, between the Hill of Archers and the Ohod mountain range, there was a gap. And this gap could easily be exploited if the Mushrikeen decided to go around. So what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did is that he ordered a Sahabi called Abdullah ibn Jubair, and he had 50 archers with him. And he ordered them to go up the Hill of Archers, and they were basically entrusted with the responsibility of countering or destroying any counterattack from the Mushrikeen. So if they ever wanted to go around the hill, they were instructed to take them down right away with their arrows. And they were given very, very detailed instructions. They were told to only aim at cavalry, only at horsemen. They were told to stay up that hill, no matter what. You'd be surprised if you read the seerah how extensive the orders were. But basically, the gist of it is that your responsibility is to destroy any cavalry attack that tries to encircle us. And you got to stay up there no matter what. No matter what's going on the ground underneath in the main battle, you're not allowed to come down. And they knew that very well. And Abdullah ibn Jubair, knew those orders very well. The Mushrikeen, of course, they had their army. The way it was situated is they had the main infantry army in the center, and they had cavalry units on the right and left flanks. Khalid ibn al-Walid, at that time, he wasn't even a Muslim yet. He controlled the right flank. So he controlled the cavalry on the right flank of the army of the Mushrikeen. It's going to be relevant later on. We'll talk about it. Saturday, 22nd March, 625, the year 625 AD. This wasn't a guerrilla battle. This was a proper military confrontation. Things were about to get very serious. And the battle begins. Frontal assault, like we said, there's no other way. The Muslims fight extremely hard. Their faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fueled them. Their bravery really sort of empowered them. And they were winning. They were winning big time. They held their line very strongly. They inflicted some heavy casualties on the Mushrikeen. Sources, they killed the flag bearer 9 times. So there's someone who bears the flag for the army of the Mushrikeen. They'd kill him. Someone else would come take the flag. They'd kill him as well. 9 times they did that. The Mushrikeen, seeing, what was going on, they began to get, they began to lose morale. They even tried to encircle around the hill of archers. But whenever they tried to do that, the archers at the top of the hill would strike them down right away, just like they were instructed to do. And then now the Muslims are, the Mushrikeen are getting defeated. And they begin actually fleeing before the Muslim army, despite their huge advantage they had. They thought it was over for them. Khalid ibn al-Walid, he sort of commanded his unit to retreat, but to maintain cohesion. So his right flank of cavalry, he told them to retreat, commanded the retreat, but it was much more orderly than the rest of the Mushrikeen army. They were just running away like crazy. He was actually successful in managing to keep his unit together. The Muslim army, seeing their stunning victory, they actually became chaotic, especially those archers that were on the hill. So they saw the enemy fleeing. They're looking down and all they see is the spoils of war, the swords and the shields, the horses that are being left behind. And they want to go sort of and enjoy those spoils, enjoy the fruits of victory. And they're trying to come down the hill. But Abdullah ibn al-Jubair, who was commanding them up that hill, he reminded them of the Prophet's orders. Don't go down no matter what. That was the key order. No matter what's going on in the battlefield, don't go down unless I order you to. And after a big argument on the hill of archers, the archers disobeyed. They disobeyed the orders of Abdullah ibn al-Jubair and by extension, the orders of the Prophet ﷺ. And they go down the hill. Only 3 archers remained with Abdullah ibn al-Jubair on the hill on the day of Ohod. Watching this was who? Khalid ibn al-Walid. He had his unit. The unit was still somewhat cohesive, but he saw an opportunity to attack now that the archers on the hill were gone. And he sent a small detachment up the hill of cavalry. And they killed Abdullah ibn al-Jubair and the 3 archers that were still remaining on the hill. And then he sent the rest of his unit at top speed around the hill and began striking now the rear of the Muslim army. Exactly what the Muslims feared and they didn't want to happen. And now the Mushrikeen who were fleeing, the other units, now they see that there's a counterattack. And that they see now, all of a sudden, we were able to encircle them and now we're attacking the rear. And that's when they begin to recover. They begin to come back to fight after they were fleeing. And just like that, the Muslims out of nowhere were encircled from the front and from the rear. The Muslims were now losing. They began retreating up the Ohod mountain range. 70 Muslims were killed that day. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was injured that day, and 16 of the top Sahabas were killed, including Hamza, the Prophet's uncle. The day of Ohod was a tactical defeat, but it didn't have to be. In fact, it was actually a stunning victory at the beginning, initially. But because discipline was lost, because the archers abandoned their post, it was a defeat. And now ask yourself, what brought those archers down the hill? Simple question. And it's important for us to understand what caused the defeat in order to be able to avoid something like that in the future. History is something to be learned from. Well, the answer is that they got distracted by some material prizes. Material prizes, by the way, they are the detriment, the weak point of human nature. The archers up on the hill, they had a clear goal. Their goal, their order was to protect the left flank and the rear of the Muslim army from encirclement. But now they see a bunch of very nice things on the ground. And it's very appealing to their instincts. And that sort of sways them. It makes them forget they were ever up there even in the first place. Why they were ever up there in the first place. And them sort of submitting to their wild, irrational instinct. That's what made them fail. And that, the cost was very dearly to everyone, including the ones that they were supposed to be protecting on the ground, who were some of the best people, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Sahaba. And because they submitted to their intrinsic irrational failures, and they failed. In fact, submitting to intrinsic irrational failures or intrinsic irrational desires, it can make you fail in anything, in any field, just like it made them fail. Here's a very good example, the stock market. The stock market plays extremely heavily on human psychology. If you've ever been there, if you've ever done it, if you ever played around with stocks, you'd know. Every stock investor, of course, he seeks to increase his profits. And the key to that is to have a good strategy. To think about the long term, to invest in companies, with actual value, with good revenue, good products. Many stock investors who are new to the whole thing, they start out that way. They start out with a strategy like that, something very sensible, because they go in pretty serious and they want to have a sensible plan. But the downfall of many investors is when they get distracted by stocks or shares that are skyrocketing, but there's really no value to back that movement up. It's just all hype. For example, something that's pretty relevant to our recent times, the whole GameStop craze that happened recently, where the value of the stock of GameStop stock just completely fully took off based on some hype on Reddit, not really because of actual value, but because because the community on Reddit just wanted to throw that stock up in the air. Many novice investors bought into it to get their share of the big gains that everyone was was catching up on, but the price rise eventually didn't have any material value to back it up, and it eventually crumbled. And many people lost thousands of dollars because they lost their common sense. They lost their sense of strategy. They lost sight of their goal, and they submitted to those irrational instincts, biological instincts. They were chasing after money. They submitted to those instincts, and then they failed. It's typical human nature at play. Another quite sad example is many Muslim students, for example, who come from Muslim countries to study in Western universities. A lot of them, by the way, come with a sensible goal, a good strategic plan. I want to be disciplined. I want to get educated in this prestigious university so I can boost my career. Many of them start off great. But any Muslim who goes to a Western university knows, and knows how strong and widespread and absolutely monstrous the temptations are. The fitna is. Those temptations are exactly what plays to the irrational side of human nature. Many Muslims, as a result, lose sight of their goal. They start going to parties and drinking, committing zina, or taking off their hijab because of those temptations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us about human nature in the Quran. أَفَمَنْ كَانَ عَلَى بَيِّنَةٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ كَمَنْ زُيِّنَ لَهُ سُوءُ عَمَلِهِ وَاتَّبَعُوا أَهْوَاءَهُمْ. Or another ayah, يَا دَاوُودُ إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاكَ خَلِيفَةً فِي الْأَرْضِ فَاحْكُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِالْحَقِّ وَلَا تَتَّبِعِ الْهَوَى فَيُضِلَّكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Temptations, instinct, hawa. That's the word in question. Hawa. It was always associated in the Quran with failure. It was always associated with straying from the path, the right path, from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The moral of the story is that wild instincts, they're unavoidable. They're just a biological fact. But the difference between the successful and unsuccessful person is the ability to work in spite of those instincts and not to sort of lose sight of the strategy or the main goal or the main objective. It's the core tenet of Islamic doctrine. And people have learned, the lesson the hard way time and time again. Maybe if you grasp that lesson, you won't need to learn it the hard way. Jazakumullah khairan everyone for listening. It was a pleasure presenting to you on the MuslimDo app. Make sure to support it by encouraging your friends and family to download it. Also, rate it on the App Store and the Play Store. You know the drill. I'll see you guys all next week, inshallah, for the third episode. And Assalamu alaikum.